For 10,000 years, mankind whispered one prayer: let him rise. But when the Emperor finally awakened, salvation was nowhere to be found. A psychic scream erupted, not through sound, but through the fabric of existence itself, piercing me like a frozen spear that stopped my twin hearts before slamming them back to life. Mortal serfs dropped instantly, blood streaming from their eyes, ears, and mouths, as their minds were erased by the mere touch of his awakening consciousness. Through the sanctum viewports, Terra itself was convulsing as gold pillars of light erupted skyward, tearing through the atmosphere while hab blocks folded like paper and sky lanes unraveled into raining metal. Up in orbit, ships detonated in silent bursts, their drives bursting like dying stars. Around me, every custodian fell, their aura-mite armor hitting the marble like discarded toys. Everyone except me. I do not know why I survived. Perhaps centuries beside him carved some thin immunity into my soul. Or perhaps he had a purpose for me. Then his eyes opened. 2 new suns igniting in the chamber, cold instead of hot, illuminating not matter, but thought. Their light peeled through my memories, my fears, my secrets, cataloging everything I had ever been. And in that terrible moment, I understood. This was not the Emperor humanity prayed for, not the Father returning to embrace his wounded Imperium. This was something forged by 10,000 years of agony, 10,000 years trapped between godhood and death, witnessing his dream rot into fanaticism. This was wrath incarnate, awake at last. The sanctum became a tomb, alarms screaming, cogitators bursting, sisters of silence twitching on the ground, tech priests blinded as their metal eyes melted. Yet he was calm, focused, purposeful. And in the shifting haze around him, I felt something colder than terror. He was smiling, not with flesh, but with thought. Then his voice entered my mind, vast and absolute. You kept watch. You endured. And now, you will witness. Psychic fire carved molten lines across the throne room as my armor sparked and the air warped. And I finally saw what he had become. Not man, not God, not emperor, judgment itself. Humanity had begged for his return, but the galaxy had forgotten a truth older than the Imperium. The emperor was never merciful, not in life, not in death, and certainly not in rebirth. I am Captain Malcian Vane, the last custodian who remained standing when a god awoke. And as the light consumed the world, one truth echoed through my soul. He had not risen to save humanity. He had risen to judge it. I was there when the Emperor opened his eyes. 10,000 years of silence. 10,000 years of watching a corpse that the entire Imperium called a god. And never, not once, did I imagine that the moment of his return would fill me with such terror. My name is Captain Malcian Vane of the Adeptus Custodes, one of the 10,000, a guardian of the Golden Throne. I have stood my vigil for 4 centuries, an insignificant fraction of his long decay, yet enough to carve the weight of eternity into my mind. Now I stand alone to tell you what truly happened on the day he awakened. The first sign was a tremor, small, almost a shiver in the marble bones of the inner sanctum. The tech priests dismissed it as another ancient mechanism grinding in its sleep. The Sisters of Silence detected nothing. But we, the custodians, know the throne room the way a warrior knows his scars. This tremor was alive. I stood at my assigned position on the southeast quadrant of the throne, my halberd grounded, my mind focused into the perfect stillness that only centuries of duty can produce. The tremor returned, stronger. The air thickened as if invisible electricity flooded the chamber. Tech priests scuttled faster, their augmented limbs clacking with nervous energy. I saw Shield Captain Valoris turn his head a fraction, a gesture as close to alarm as our kind ever shows. Then the pressure hit. A psychic force so immense it felt like the Imperium itself had fallen on my skull. I had felt null fields before, sisters of silence walking past like cold voids in human shape. But this was an entirely different magnitude. This wasn't absence. This was presence. Then came the light, not from the throne's machinery, not from the hundreds of candles or lumen pillars. This light radiated from him, from the withered husk that had not moved since before any of us were born. It started as a glow, then a blaze, then a blinding eruption of golden fire that washed over the chamber like the birth of a star. Tech priests screamed. Some dropped their tools, others dropped to their knees. Their machine spirits flickered, their implants stuttered, as if reality itself had become incompatible with their existence. The Sisters of Silence convulsed, blood seeping from beneath their helms. Even their null minds, built to drown psychic horrors, were no match for what was unfolding. I felt my consciousness buckle, crushing under the storm. Only relentless conditioning and gene-crafted biology kept me on my feet. And then I saw his hand move. Skeletal fingers, dead for 10 millennia, twitched, curled, gripped the arm of his throne with a sound like stone splitting. The chamber shook violently. Dust cascaded from the vaulted ceiling. Servo skulls plummeted to the floor, their spirits snuffed out like candles in a hurricane. Shadows formed, impossible shadows, moving across the walls with intent, with hunger. Then his head lifted, slowly, painfully, with the weight of 10,000 years behind it. The light grew brighter, lancing across the sanctum, warping the air. Reality trembled like a fragile membrane, stretched to tearing. And then he opened his eyes. In that instant, something tore. Not just in the room, not just in the warp. Something tore in every living mind across Terra. Billions died without a sound. And as the echo of their erasure rolled across the palace, I realized the truth. We had not witnessed salvation. We had, through the agony in my skull and the pressure that threatened to crush me from the inside, I did not hear him with my ears. I felt him speak inside my mind. The voice contained multitudes, layered like cathedral choirs, ancient like mountains, precise like a blade. Malchian, it said, a name I had nearly forgotten after centuries of being nothing but a sentinel. Witness what must follow, the light answered. It no longer merely glowed from his ruined frame. It reached as if the throne had sprouted fingers of flame. Tendrils of cold gold threaded through the chamber, and then through rock, metal, and sky, passing as if matter were a curtain. I felt them slide across Terra, across the solar system, across the Black Sea between suns. Where those tendrils touched, something measured and condemned. I felt the deaths as if they were falling through my own bones. Billions of minds snuffed out in an instant on Terra alone. Every false saint, every corrupt priest who had bent his name for coin or power, every zealot who had turned worship into tyranny. Their thoughts unraveled and vanished without a scream. Across the warp, psychers shrieked as their skulls could not contain the light. Navigators went mad, their third eyes burning out beneath an impossible glare. Astropaths, mid-transmission, dissolved into gray ash as the tide of his will erased them. The Astronomicon, that blinding central lantern we relied on, flared anew, not as a gentle guide, but as a scouring lance. The beacon became a weapon, scourging the warp of creatures that had feasted on humanity's suffering for millennia. and still it was only the opening note. I watched the body on the throne change. The desiccated flesh did not grow flesh again, and it did not return to the man we had named in prayer. Instead, the corpse filled with something else, pure psychic energy taking weight and edge. Ancient tubes, conduits, and sacramental machinery that had held him like a reliquary peeled away as if ashamed. The servo tubes melted. The clamps fell loose. The tech priests who survived howled in the thin net between horror and a rapture that tasted of sacrilege. For the rites they had guarded so devoutly became obsolete in a single, impossible minute. He rose like a natural disaster given shape. Foot by foot, he left the throne. When his feet touched the obsidian, the floor did not simply bear weight. It unfolded. Stone became something both glyph and membrane, reality rippling out from each step. Laws we used to trust, gravity, light, the stubborn arithmetic of cause and effect, bent and folded in his presence. The world rearranged itself to make room for what he now was. I am Captain Malcian Vane. I stood and watched, not in triumph, but in a dread so absolute it might be called worship's last honest face. He had not been restored to us. He had been remade, and in that remaking was the cold logic of a reckoning no prayer had ever prepared us for. They turned my vision into a religion. They braided obedience and superstition into an empire of suffering, built altars to my name, sold salvation for coin, and taught children to kneel rather than think. I watched it happen for 10,000 years, and when he finally woke, I realized the only lesson left to teach was judgment. Pain exploded inside my skull, and a pressure that felt like the sky pressing down. His voice did not travel through air. It arrived inside me like 1,000 choirs speaking at once, older than seasons, precise as a blade. Malcian, he said, using the name I'd kept in private. Witness what must follow. Light stopped being passive and became action. Golden tendrils threaded through stone, through adamantium, through the atmosphere as if matter were a curtain. Wherever they touched, they judged. I felt those touches in my bones. Entire minds snuffed out across Terra in a single instant. False saints, greedy priests, cultists who'd warped his teachings into shackles. Psychers screamed as their skulls buckled. Navigators' third eyes flamed and died. Astropaths crumbled mid-signal to ash. The Astronomicon flared not as beacon, but as scouring lance, burning the warp of the predators that had fed on humanity's suffering. I watched his corpse unmake and remake itself. The sacred conduits and servo tubes that had held him together for millennia liquefied and fell away. Tech priests howled, rapture braided with terror, as the golden throne, their holy reliquary, became obsolete in moments. He did not grow flesh. He reconstituted as force, pure psychic energy grafted into form. He rose, and when his feet touched the obsidian, reality rippled outward. Stone became glyph and membrane. Gravity, light, cause and consequence bent to accommodate him. We walked the ruined palace together. Where once faith had been loudest, death had been deepest. Melted aquillas, shattered icons, chapels hollowed of worshippers. At the Eternity Gate, a line of battle-scarred space marines stood their ground and pleaded. My lord, halt. This cannot be your will. His light sharpened, focused, and I expected ash. Instead, the beam revealed truth, gene-seed corruption, pride in place of duty, small betrayals accumulated into monstrous compromise. Some wept, some dropped to their knees. One captain kept standing, tears on his face and love in his voice. We have failed you, but we have always loved you, Father. Love was not his request. He called it dependency and demanded growth. When the captain did not change, the emperor struck and erased him as though wiping a stain. One by one, the Marines vanished. My loyalty twisted into a question I had no right to ask. Serve my God, or save the human beings he deemed unworthy? He expanded my sight until I felt 1 billion lives unspool before me. The crowded hives, the forge worlds fused with flesh, the death worlds that birthed champions at unimaginable cost. I saw the ecclesiarchy and inquisition profiting in his name. I saw the mechanica burying innovation beneath ritual. I saw the great hypocrisy of an Imperium that preserved life by killing the soul of living itself. Then, like a surgical light, he showed me exceptions. Small communities, lone teachers, quiet resistances whose eyes opened to truth rather than dying. He called these seeds. Destroy the false, he said. Save the seed. The warp itself convulsed as golden currents purged corruption. Demons fled, the ruinous powers recoiled. Worlds and gods trembled. He told me he would not return to the throne. He would remake humanity by force of will and mind. He asked me, Malchon, custodian, last faithful son, to be his voice. I could have obeyed. I could have let the scale tip toward extinction. Instead, I spoke a treason that tasted like truth. Guide them. Do not annihilate what can be taught. I argued for patience, for restoration blended with judgment. For a heartbeat, I saw something like doubt cross his face, then resolve. He agreed to reconsider the indiscriminate erasure. He would cut the rot, spare the seed, and remold the Imperium. But the old order would end. The cost would be monstrous. Wars would come. Whole institutions would fall. Many would die. He set me at his side in the reformed Senate, made me ambassador to a reborn humanity. The work began not with trumpets, but with surgical, remorseless change. Hoarded technologies redistributed, the worst offenders forced to feel the cruelty they had authored, the faithful whose devotion had been toxic unmade. Terran skylines were repaired, some hive cities reopened to air and daylight. Mars trembled, and the Mechanicum divided between preservationists and zealots, whose minds were, in many cases, extinguished. The Astronomicon, tempered, became a tool to heal as much as to judge. What happens when the Emperor wakes? Everything changes, empires rot, gods quail, humankind faces a terrible rebirth. I am Malchon Vane. I watched him rise, I watched worlds burn and then begin to be remade. I chose not to enable blind annihilation. I chose to be the instrument of a guided, brutal mercy. Whether that mercy becomes salvation or a new cruelty remains to be seen. But the galaxy will never be the same. 1. A universe, held in breathless suspension. There are moments in history when reality seems to hold its breath. Moments so vast, so impossibly significant, that time itself feels uncertain. I remember the first of those moments when he awakened. I remember the blinding light, the shattering of cosmic boundaries, the judgment that swept across humanity. But that moment was merely the strike of the match. The flame it lit did not burn out. It burned outward. And now, as I stand amidst the hum of technologies that should not exist, I realize the galaxy is still in that suspended breath. We are all waiting, worlds, species, empires, held in an eternal pause before a new age fully ignites. He has returned not as the corpse god they fashioned from myth, but as something sharper, purer, terrifying in clarity. The sensation that permeates the air feels like a storm building just beyond sight. The silence is thick, almost reverent, as though even atoms remember the agony of his awakening. I feel the echo of that light even now, not as pain, but as memory carved into the bones of existence. And though I have stood beside him through centuries of shadow, I still tremble, for change on this scale does not arrive gently. 2. A presence that reshapes reality. He stands at the center of the ship's command deck, and the air bends around him as if it must acknowledge his passage. His form, no longer the withered relic sustained by machinery, radiates a calm that belies the weight of his presence. The psychic pressure is controlled now, refined into something that mortals can withstand, though barely. When he speaks, he does not use sound. The words arrive in the mind, fully formed, accompanied by layers of meaning no language could contain. He is not merely a being, he is an event, a gravity well in the fabric of fate. Even contained, his presence strains the reality around him. Panels hum with frequencies beyond engineering. The floor glimmers under each footstep as matter subtly reorganizes itself. The tech adepts, no longer priests but scholars, watch him the way astronomers might watch a star being born. There is fear, yes. Awe, always. But beneath it all is recognition. They know they stand before the architect of what must come next. 3. Ripples through the galaxy. When he awakened, the consequences did not move outward. They detonated outward. Warp storms collapsed. Astropathic screams echoed across the void before falling into absolute silence. Worlds that had depended on tortured psychic transmission discovered, for the first time in millennia, that communication could be clean, instantaneous, almost gentle. Planets once strangled by bureaucratic dependence began to flourish. Without the parasitic tangle of archaic decrees binding them to Terra, they discovered their own innovations, their own momentum. Industries rose from stagnation, cities transformed within years into something unrecognizable. But with progress came fear. The shadow of judgment still lingered. Billions had died during his awakening, erased for corruption, for false devotion, for wielding faith as a weapon. Their absence hung over the survivors like a silent, impossible question. Would his judgment fall again? Would it choose differently next time? Across star systems, that uncertainty fueled revolutions, unseated tyrants, shattered dynasties. The galaxy was not merely changing, it was convulsing. And he watched it all with the gaze of one who had seen humanity's potential and humanity's deepest rot, holding both an equal, solemn weight. 4. Humanity's fractured response. On some worlds, his return was met with celebrations that bordered on hysteria. People danced in the streets, painting symbols of renewal on their walls and skin. They saw in him the fulfillment of prophecies they had misunderstood for millennia. Entire planetary cultures had been built on systems of exploitation, justified by his supposed divinity. When they learned he rejected worship, not just discouraged it, but condemned it, they fell into turmoil. Priests wept, rulers raged, millions felt abandoned, as though their God had turned his face away. The psychological upheaval was staggering. For many, faith had been the only shield against a universe full of horrors. To be told that the shield had never been meant for them, that it had been a prison constructed by those claiming to speak in his name, was a wound deeper than any blade. And yet, he did not strike them down. He did not repeat the judgment of his awakening. His will unfolded differently now, with the precision of a surgeon, not the fire of a purging flame. Humanity would be remade, but it would not be remade through fear. 5. Warriors of tradition and rebellion. The Space Marines reacted in ways as varied as their histories. Some chapters fell to their knees the instant they felt his presence. Their gene seed resonated with the unmistakable recognition of the one from whom their lineage flowed. These warriors embraced his corrections with humility, accepting that traditions built over 10,000 years had warped into brittle dogma. Others resisted. To them, the return of the Emperor was a threat, not to humanity, but to the carefully cultivated identities they had constructed from fragments of myth. They refused to abandon their rites, their warrior creeds, their beliefs in what the Imperium had become. He did not destroy them. Instead, he isolated them within pockets of space, regions where they could hold their ways without touching the broader transformation of mankind. A mercy, but also a reminder. Traditions that do not evolve are not sacred. They are fossils, and like fossils, they would be preserved but irrelevant. For the first time in millennia, the Legions Astartes were no longer unified. They were fragments, each choosing their own path through a universe being rewritten. 6. The unmaking and reforging of faith. The greatest upheaval came not from warriors or politicians, but from the faithful. The Imperial Cult had grown into a monolith, a vast structure of worship built on the belief that he was a god. That belief had sustained billions through lives of suffering, oppression, and fear. To learn that he rejected divinity struck many as an existential wound. Temples filled with wailing. Clerics collapsed as psychic pressure swept away centuries of doctrine in moments. Entire planets sank into mourning. And yet, he did not erase their faith. He transformed it. Rituals remained, but their focus shifted. Prayers became meditations, litanies became lessons. Churches transformed into academies, places where knowledge was sacred, not worship. Entire populations learned, slowly and painfully, that devotion to him had never been the goal. 7. Those who watch from the shadows. While humanity convulsed with transformation, its enemies watched. The forces of chaos recoiled from his awakening, their gods weakened, but far from broken. In the darkest reaches of the warp, they whispered, plotted, adapted. He had dealt them a blow, not a death. Their hunger had not diminished. Their patience had grown. Alien empires, some ancient, some newly risen, studied the shifting Imperium with mixtures of fear and opportunity. The Eldar saw echoes of prophecies they had trusted too deeply. The Tau debated diplomacy. The Orcs felt a surge of instinctive excitement, sensing battles on a scale they could barely imagine. The galaxy was reorganizing itself, and in its rearrangement lay cracks through which enemies would eventually pour. He knew this. He welcomed it. Growth does not come in peace. It comes in trials. 8. The messenger of a new age. As the galaxy transformed, I traveled through its reborn corridors. I served as his voice, his shield, his interpreter, because mortals could not withstand his presence directly. They needed a filter, a human face, a voice that carried meaning rather than raw psychic force. I spoke before councils that trembled at rumors of his judgment. I stood in academies where priests now taught mathematics instead of worship. I watched entire worlds shed their old skins. But I also witnessed resistance and pain, the raw wounds of transformation. There is no rebirth without tearing the old structure apart. And in those moments, I questioned myself. Not my loyalty, never that, but my place in this vast reordering of existence. Was I still merely custodian? Or had I become something else? A relic carried forward out of sentiment? Or a tool still necessary to bridge beings and worlds? He never answered those questions. He didn't need to. His silence was its own kind of guidance. 9. The vessel that should not exist. The ship on which I now stand is a masterpiece of a forgotten era, the dark age of technology. And yet, it is more than that. Its engines do not tear through the warp. They do not rely on the tortured minds of navigators staring into madness. This ship travels by folding reality itself, bending the lattice of space-time like a craftsman shaping metal. Such technology had been lost for millennia, feared as much as forgotten. But under his guidance, the scholars once known as tech priests rediscovered principles they had only worshipped as sacred relics. Freed from dogma, their innovation surged like a flood, held back for too long. The ship hums with frequencies I cannot decipher. Panels shift in quiet patterns. Lights pulse in rhythms that feel alive. This is not a vessel. It is a statement. Humanity would no longer crawl across the stars. It would stride. And now we approach a dead world. A world stripped bare by the Tyranid hive fleet behemoth. A world that once screamed beneath alien hunger, until it was nothing more than a barren scar. The instruments say it is silent, empty, lifeless. He says otherwise. 10. The world that will live. Again we stand at the viewport. The dead world rotates below, a sphere of gray ruin orbiting a star that has forgotten its name. No atmosphere, no water, no memory of life. This world will live again, Malchon, he says, and the words strike deeper than prophecy. They strike like certainty. Energy gathers around him. Not light, not flame, but something purer. A resonance, a harmonic vibration that makes the deck tremble. The scholars whisper prayers without realizing it, old habits surfacing even as their faith changes form. He lifts a hand, and space bends. The planet's surface glimmers, as though reality is thinning, revealing the blueprint beneath. I feel the shift in my bones, the sensation of creation, not destruction. Life is not returning. Life is being rewritten. Clouds coalesce from nothing. Oceans form from vapor ignited into being. Forests explode outward in waves of green. In seconds, the world transforms from barren rock to vibrant potential. He lowers his hand. Watch, he says, not as command, but as invitation. The work has only begun. And as the newborn world spins below us, glowing with the promise of a future no one can yet comprehend, I understand. This is not the return of an emperor. This is the dawn of a maker. The moment the emperor turned back toward the newborn world, the bridge fell into a silence so complete it felt physical, like a pressure in the lungs. His radiance, contained yet impossibly vast, dimmed to a steady, deliberate glow. The tech priests behind us instinctively lowered their gaze, their reforming neural augmentations struggling to comprehend the scale of power that had just been unleashed. I remained frozen. My thoughts scrambled by the shock of witnessing an entire world reborn in minutes. A feat that broke every law of physics humanity had ever catalogued. He extended his hand toward the view screen once more, but this time the gesture carried a gentleness, a precision that contrasted sharply with the raw fury of his awakening on Terra. I felt the surge before I saw its effects, a wave of psychic resonance that reverberated through the ship's hull and into my bones. The barren planet below rippled, the crust shifting as though reality itself were liquefying. A shimmer, heat haze across continents, spread outward, followed by the impossible sight of green blooming where lifeless stone had been. Oceans formed in spirals, filling basins that had been dry for 1,000 years. Storm systems spun into existence, seeded by forces far beyond atmospheric science. This is but the first, he said, lowering his hand as the transformation stabilized. One world among millions that will be reborn. His voice was calm, But beneath it lay a tectonic gravity that felt older than the galaxy itself. The Imperium consumed its worlds, Malchon, stripped them of resources, poisoned them with industry, sacrificed them for strategic convenience. That ends now. I stared at the living world below us, struggling to reconcile this moment with the history I'd served for so long. The Emperor, the Conqueror, the Tactician, the immortal strategist, had become something else entirely. Not merely the ruler of humanity, but its gardener. Humanity will learn to nurture the worlds it inhabits, he continued, to live in balance with the universe rather than in constant war against it. Yet even as he spoke those words, the old fears clawed at me. What of our enemies, my lord? I asked quietly. Chaos is weakened, but not gone. The Tyranids approach from the void. The Necrons awaken. Even as we rebuild, they prepare to destroy what we create. He turned toward me, and for a terrifying instant, I caught a glimpse of something infinite inside his gaze. Depths that stretched backward to the dawn of stars. The greatest enemy humanity has ever faced, he said softly, was itself. He lifted a hand and the view screen shifted, showing visions across the galaxy, some present, some perhaps yet to come. I could not be certain. Space Marines, once zealous instruments of war, now stood beside Eldar warriors, their ancient animosities set aside to fight demons surging from cracks in the veil. Human colonists farmed alongside Tau engineers, hybrid colonies built on mutual benefit rather than conquest. Even Necron lords, immortal metal kings of forgotten empires, entered pacts with human diplomats, their calculations revealing that coexistence offered greater stability than war. Address humanity's internal flaws, the Emperor continued, and the external threats become manageable. It was heresy, blasphemy, treason against 10,000 years of doctrine. And yet, it was true. The Imperium had defined survival as domination, a constant grinding war against anything that was not human. But that philosophy had not saved us. It had merely prolonged the inevitable collapse. Not all Xenos are enemies, he said. Some are potential allies. Others are simply life following its own path through the universe. Humanity must be secure enough in itself to coexist rather than destroy reflexively. I swallowed hard, the weight of the idea suffocating in its implications. An Imperium that cooperated with aliens? That shared worlds, technology, destiny? It was unimaginable. And yet, here he stood, reshaping not only reality, but every assumption upon which reality had been built. And what of the greater threat? I asked quietly, almost afraid to speak the words. What of the Tyranids, the endless hunger, the living void? What of chaos, whose hatred for us will never fade? He stepped closer to the view screen, his silhouette framed by stars. Chaos feeds on human suffering, fear, contradiction, hypocrisy. Correct those flaws at the root and the warp will starve. The screen shifted again. Now it showed the warp itself, roiling storms of madness, but calmer than I had ever seen. Sections of the Imperium shimmering as though being purified from within. As for the Tyranids, he said, raising a hand. The image changed. I saw swarms, millions of organisms, descending upon a world. But instead of being consumed, the planet resisted. Not with military force, but with something stranger. A psychic barrier formed not by individuals, but by entire interconnected populations. Cities that thought as one. Forests resonating in harmonic frequencies. The world itself fighting back. Unity creates power, he said. Humanity divided is prey. Humanity awakened is untouchable. The screen shifted again, now showing Necron tomb worlds, some hostile, some negotiating, some awakening only to hesitate, running calculations on the Emperor's new presence and deciding, for the first time in 60 million years, that war was no longer optimal. "The galaxy is changing, Malchon," he said, "and humanity will lead that change, not through tyranny, not through oppression, but through evolution." I watched him, awe and fear intertwining inside me. "My lord," I whispered, "what is it you intend?" He looked at me, no longer as the Emperor of mankind, but as something far older, far greater. A being who had transcended even the myth built around him. "I intend," he said, "to end the age of war." Silence followed, but it was not empty. It was the silence before a new era's birth. The silence before a storm that would not destroy, but remake. The bridge vibrated softly as the ship prepared to descend toward the reborn world. Gene architects, reformed tech priests, psychers stabilized by the Emperor's new presence, all awaited his command. I felt the shifting of destiny itself. For 10,000 years, we had survived only by sacrificing everything: worlds, people, truth, hope. But now, for the first time since humanity crawled from the ruins of old Earth, there was a future worth fighting for. "Come, Malchon," he said, stepping toward the descending platform. "A new age begins, and humanity must witness its dawn." The doors opened, light flooded in, and I followed him into the future he was forging with every step. The galaxy had slept for millennia, wrapped in a blanket of ignorance, fear, and the shallow comforts of faith. I stood on the bridge of a starship older than most civilizations, gazing at the swirling nebulae below, feeling a presence that made the stars themselves seem dim. He was awake. The Emperor had stirred, and with him, the very fabric of reality seemed to shift. I remember the first time I had truly understood the magnitude of his awakening. It was not in the ceremonies of the Imperial Cult, nor in the worshipful murmurs of billions across the Imperium. It was here, in the silence of the void, when his voice reached into my mind. Not as a whisper, not as a command, but as a recognition of the precariousness of our existence. "You see, Malkian," he said, and I could feel the words before I could hear them. "Humanity teeters at a precipice. Psychic power grows in every child born, in every mind that dares to reach beyond the mundane. This growth is beautiful, yes, but it is also dangerous. Without guidance, without protection, the warp will consume them. The entities you call chaos are patient predators. They will exploit weakness, as they always have." His gaze seemed to penetrate the void and my very thoughts, unearthing fears I had never spoken aloud. I felt the weight of his purpose pressing against my consciousness. The Imperium, even as it had existed for 10,000 years, was not the perfection the cult worshipped. It was a shield, a guide, a framework for survival. And now, in its transformation, it would become something greater. I swallowed hard, feeling both awe and terror in equal measure. But, my lord, can humanity truly be safeguarded? The chaos that hungers for us, can we ever withstand it? A silence stretched across the void, and then his presence seemed to expand, filling every corner of my mind. "Malkian, the Imperium was created for a reason, not for glory, not for worship, but for survival. The awakening of the human psyche is the next step in evolution. Yet evolution without guidance is chaos. A child who can shape reality with thought alone, untrained and unprotected, becomes a gateway to destruction. My will alone cannot intervene in every instance, nor should it. Humanity must learn, guided shielded, but not coddled. They must find their strength within themselves, even as I shape the scaffolding of their survival. I nodded, feeling the enormity of the responsibility weigh upon me. Then I will serve, my lord. For as long as I am able, I will guide those who cannot guide themselves. His hand rested on my shoulder. A simple gesture, yet the currents of energy it sent through me reshaped my perception of possibility. I understood then that service was not just duty. It was transformation. To serve him was to witness and partake in the rebirth of civilizations. It was to see death and decay replaced with life and potential, world by world, mind by mind. The path will not be easy, he continued. There will be worlds lost, psychers consumed, civilizations shattered. But in each loss, there will also be a lesson. And in each lesson, the seeds of triumph. Humanity has endured because it is adaptable, resilient. But resilience alone is not enough. They must awaken fully, guided and tempered. And for that, I am necessary. I am not the God the Imperium worships. That God is an ideal, a myth. I am something far more complex, a being of power, yes, but also of foresight, caution, and humility. Even I cannot assure success. Even I cannot prevent failure. What I can do is create the conditions for evolution. I looked out at the reborn worlds visible through the viewport. Planets that had once been lifeless, now teeming with nascent life. Streams of energy coursing through their cores. So this is the beginning? I asked. He smiled, though it was not a smile of triumph, but one of somber understanding. The beginning? Perhaps. The awakening? Certainly. Humanity's first steps into its true potential will be fraught with danger. And yet, for the first time in 10 millennia, there is hope. Not the false hope of blind worship. Not the desperate hope of survival against impossible odds. Real hope. The hope of becoming more than they have ever imagined. Of fulfilling the latent potential embedded in their DNA, in their very minds. The cosmos itself waits for them, and for that, they must be ready. I felt the tug of fear and excitement in equal measure. To witness such awakening was a privilege, but also a burden. What if the guidance faltered? What if choices were made that I could not undo? The Emperor's eyes, or rather, his perception, seemed to sense my hesitation. Fear is natural, he said almost softly, yet the words struck with the weight of galaxies. It is not the absence of fear that defines strength, Malkian, but the courage to act despite it. You will make mistakes. I will make mistakes. Humanity will make mistakes. But through trial, through vigilance, through the guidance I provide, we will reach a point where mistakes no longer destroy, but teach. I felt my resolve solidify. Then I will stand as witness, as guide, as protector. For the Imperium, for humanity, for the awakening to come. A hum of energy pulsed through the chamber as he turned back to the display, showing the intricate latticework of planets, stars, and civilizations. Worlds rose from ruin, ships glided into orbit around flourishing cities, psychic nodes sparked across space like fireflies in the night. Watch closely, Malkian. Each spark you see is a mind awakening, each light a civilization reborn. The Imperium, you knew, is a shadow of what is to come. This is the dawn of true purpose, true evolution. I nodded, every fiber of my being attuned to the vision unfolding. And what of chaos? I asked. Will they not intervene? They will try, he said. And for the first time, I sensed the weight of inevitability in his tone. They always do. But no longer will humanity be unprepared. Each mind, each psycher, Each world will have guidance. The gateways will close. The predators will starve or be repelled. But vigilance is eternal. The battle is unending, and yet, for the first time, victory is not an impossible dream. The light of the reborn worlds reflected across the viewport, and I felt something inside me shift. Not just understanding, but hope. A hope that was earned, not granted. A hope forged in the knowledge of risk, in the embrace of duty, in the acknowledgement of both the power and limitations of the being before me. "Malkian," he said, placing a hand on my shoulder again. "Your service has only begun. The transformation of the Imperium, the rebirth of worlds, the shaping of humanity's destiny. All these are the first steps on a journey that will span millennia. Expect setbacks, expect failures, expect moments when all seems lost, and yet never doubt the potential of humanity, for within them lies the spark that will light the future of the cosmos." I swallowed, feeling the truth of those words in my bones. Then I will serve, no matter the cost. I will witness, guide, and protect, until the last world rises, until the last mind awakens. "Good," he said, and I could feel his presence receding slightly, not as a withdrawal, but as a granting of space for action. "Observe, learn, guide. Humanity will stumble, but it will rise. And through them, the cosmos will know a new era, one defined not by fear, not by blind faith, but by enlightenment, courage, and the courage to be more than what they were created to be." I looked back at the display, and the nebulae beyond the viewport seemed brighter, alive, as if the universe itself responded to the stirring of human potential. Planets teemed with life. Civilizations took their first steps into the stars, and psychic sparks flared across the void. The transformation had begun, and I was a part of it. The Emperor was awake, and with him, the true Imperium had taken its first faltering steps into the unknown. What comes next is unwritten. What comes next is danger and wonder intertwined. What comes next is the birth of something far greater than what humanity had ever imagined. And I, Malkian Vane, will bear witness to it all.